The ticket was too cheap for a flight that long. Not cheap like a sale. Cheap like I opened the app 3 times because I thought I had misread the number. Tokyo to Los Angeles. Non-stop. 11 hours. I took a screenshot. I sent it to someone I had not spoken to in a long time. No reply. I had not been the first to reach out in months. So that was fair. I bought it without thinking too hard. The reason was something I never said out loud to anyone. They had moved there almost a year ago. We lasted a few months after that. Phone calls and time zones and promises that got quieter the longer they went on. Until one point where neither of us called first. And we both let that go on long enough that it started to feel like a decision. But I had bought the ticket before any of that was final. And I thought, going to the same city does not mean going for them. Sometimes a person just needs to prove they can go anywhere, alone, without explaining it to anyone. I checked in online. Seat 47E. Narita always feels like everything has been thought of before you needed it. Orderly queues without anyone directing them. Signs that appear exactly where you need them. Staff who bow as you pass. Polite in a way that feels genuine rather than procedural. I sat at the gate an hour before boarding because there was nothing left to wait for outside. Boarding was normal. I found row 47, stored my bag in the overhead compartment, sat down. Large aircraft, Boeing 777, center block, 4 seats across with an aisle on each side. I had 47E, 1 seat in from the left aisle. The seat to my left, 47D, was empty. The 2 seats to my right were already taken. A pair who put on their headphones before the door closed. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The door closed. The plane moved. I put in my earphones, chose a film I had been meaning to watch, and decided not to think about anything else for the next 11 hours. The first 3 hours were quiet. I slept for a while. I woke up and the small screen on the seat back in front of me showed the plane still far out over the Pacific. Dark outside, cabin lights already dimmed, most passengers asleep. I walked to the lavatory at the back, waited briefly, went in, came out. On the way back past row 47, my feet stopped. Not because I decided to stop. My feet stopped first. My mind followed half a second later. There was a jacket on seat 47D. Gray. Folded neatly. Placed like someone had put it there with intention. Not dropped. Not slid from the overhead compartment, which had not been opened. I sat back down. Looked at the screen. Maybe a flight attendant had left it there. Maybe a passenger who had requested a seat change and had not arrived yet. There was an explanation for this. There always was. I closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep. I woke up. The screen in front of me was still on. The film I had not been watching had returned to the main menu. I blinked, shifted in my seat. I looked left. No particular reason. The jacket was gone. Someone was sitting there. A woman. Long hair covering most of her face. Sitting upright facing forward. Hands in her lap. Head slightly down. I sat for a moment looking at her. A flight attendant must have moved her. A plane this size always has passengers who request seat changes mid-flight. Away from the engine. Away from the window. Close to the aisle so they can get out without disturbing anyone. Seat D in the center block made sense for that. Aisle right there on the left. No need to ask anyone to move. I put my earphones back in. But she was very still. Not still the way a sleeping person is still, shifting occasionally, pulling a blanket, adjusting their head. Still like someone waiting for something to pass. I glanced at her twice without meaning to. Some kind of reflex in the corner of my eye. I thought maybe this was her first long flight. Or maybe this was just her way of getting through 11 hours. Not everyone needs a film or a book or conversation. About an hour later, a flight attendant came through with the drinks trolley. I ordered water. The flight attendant pushed the trolley one step forward, past seat 47D without stopping. Without looking, I waited a few seconds. The flight attendant was already at row 46. "Excuse me," I called out quietly. "Could I get one more?" For the person next to me. The flight attendant turned, looked at seat 47D. A pause. Not long, not short. "Of course," they said. They placed a bottle of water on the tray table at 47D. The tray table that was still folded up. The bottle stood on the folded tray table. I looked at it for a few seconds. Maybe the table was not fully latched and there was still a small flat surface. I did not want to think about it further. "Here." I turned left and nudged the bottle slightly toward her. "Do you want some water?" She shook her head. Slowly. Her hair moved a little with it. "Long flight," I said, more to myself than to her. No answer. I faced forward again. People have their own ways of getting through a long journey. Not everyone wants to talk. That was fine. I woke again a few hours later. I looked left. It had become a kind of habit without my noticing. Her position was exactly the same. Not almost the same. Exactly the same. Like a photograph that had not changed. Head at the same angle. Hair falling to the same point. Fingers in her lap facing down. Nothing had shifted by even a millimeter from the last time I had looked, 2 hours ago. The water bottle was still in the same place. Seal on the cap still unbroken. The cabin air was circulating slowly. My own hair moved slightly at my forehead. Hers did not move. I stared at the screen and did not really see anything on it for the next hour. When the flight attendants came through with breakfast, I heard them offering to the rows around me. The 2 seats to my right ordered. Row 48 ordered. Row 46 ordered. The flight attendant passed 47D. No stop, no glance. Straight to 47E and asked for my choice. I ordered. I looked left as the flight attendant moved on. She was facing forward. Same position. Ate alone. Tray on my table. A film I was not following. And next to me someone who since the middle of the night had not eaten, had not drunk, had not shifted once. And no one had asked why. The water bottle was still standing on the folded tray table. I did not touch it again. 2 hours before landing, the pilot's announcement came through. Los Angeles ahead. Clear weather. The cabin came alive. People opened window shades, stretched, started talking. The pair to my right began packing their things. The sound of bags pulled from overhead compartments. A child somewhere ahead starting to fuss. I looked left. She was facing forward. Hands in her lap. Head slightly down. Exactly the same as 3 hours ago. Exactly the same as 6 hours ago. I faced forward. The plane began its descent. The wheels touched the runway. The plane slowed, turned, taxied toward the gate. Passengers began to stand. The aisle filled. I looked left one last time. Seat 47D was empty. The seatbelt was unfastened and lying loose across the seat as if released moments ago. The water bottle was still there, seal still unbroken. The overhead compartment above row 47 had not been opened because there had been nothing stored inside it. I stood, took my bag, stepped into the aisle. Someone moved mid-flight, probably just gets off first through another door. There is always an explanation. Los Angeles terminal. Large. Loud. No one paying attention to anyone but themselves. Very different from the Narita I had left 11 hours ago. I followed the flow of people, then stopped at the side of the corridor to call someone who had said they would wait outside. "Hey," I said. "I just landed. Which exit is fastest?" They started explaining. I listened while my eyes moved around the space out of habit in a new place. Wide corridor. Tall glass windows along the right side facing directly down onto the tarmac apron. Outside, large aircraft parked in rows. Ground crew vehicles moving back and forth far below. And among everything that was moving, one thing that was not, a figure, standing at the edge of the apron far below. Alone, not wearing a crew vest or uniform. Long hair, facing up, toward the glass where I was standing. "Hey, still there?" The voice from the phone. "Still here," I said. I could not be sure it was her. From that distance, through glass that was reflecting the terminal lights, I could not read a face. Could have been anyone. It could have been a reflection of something inside the terminal doubling back through the glass. A ground crew vehicle passed between us. When it cleared, the figure was gone. "Okay, meet you at the exit." The voice from the phone. "Okay," I said. I put my phone in my pocket and walked toward immigration without looking back at the glass. We left the airport in the early evening. Los Angeles traffic already building. Easy conversation. Dinner plans. How long I was staying. I answered everything normally. An hour out of the city, the road got quieter. We took a highway that cut through greener land. Tall trees on both sides. The sun already down behind the hills. I leaned my head against the window. At the edge of the highway, where the trees grew dense and the shoulder narrowed, someone was standing. A woman. Long hair. Nothing in her hands. No car pulled over nearby. No sign that she had just stepped out of a vehicle or was waiting for one. As we passed, her head moved, following the car. I faced forward. The conversation inside the car continued normally. I answered where I was supposed to. There was nothing I could have said that would have made sense. That night, I lay in the hotel bed and went through everything from the beginning. A woman moved by a flight attendant mid-flight. Someone who did not want to talk, did not want to drink, did not want to eat. That happens. There are people like that. Then off the plane before everyone else, also fine, maybe someone helped her, maybe there is a procedure. The figure on the apron could have been anyone. Large glass always reflects things that do not always add up. The woman at the highway, people stand on the side of roads. Maybe her car had broken down. Maybe she was waiting for something. One by one, everything made sense. I closed my eyes and decided to stop thinking about it. Until the day it came. Day 2. I came back after breakfast and a short walk outside. The Los Angeles morning air cold and too bright. I took the lift, walked to the end of the corridor, opened the door to my room. My feet stopped before I had decided to stop. The gray jacket was folded neatly on the desk. I stood in the doorway and looked at it, folded in exactly the same way as the first time I had seen it on seat 47D. The same gray, not just any gray, a deeper shadow along the collar seam. A thin striped detail on the left chest panel. Barely there unless you knew where to look. I knew where to look, because I had looked before. Not similar, not coincidence. That was the same jacket. I walked in, closed the door behind me. I never meant to write this, but yesterday the plane I was on hit some turbulence. Maybe 20 seconds of it. Hard enough that before I had time to think, my right hand was already gripping the armrest in a way I did not ask it to. Not a fear reflex, more like muscle memory that already knew what to do because it had done it before. And that brought me back to a year ago. I have been trying not to write this for 12 months. Not because I do not believe what happened, but because I genuinely do not know whether I believe it or not. And writing something you cannot verify feels like lying in two directions at once. But yesterday the turbulence came, and my hand remembered before my head caught up. So here it is. The flight was 2 hours. Domestic, early morning, the kind of flight people board half asleep with coffee in hand, not really thinking about the fact that they are inside a metal tube 30,000 feet in the air. I was one of those people. I had flown enough times to stop thinking about it. I was in 13B, middle seat, left block. Not my first choice, but the only one left when I checked in. 13A, window seat, was already taken when I boarded. A middle-aged man with a neck pillow already on before boarding finished. 13C next to me, aisle seat, was empty, until a flight attendant came in with a small child. A girl, maybe 8 or 9, hair in 2 braids, small backpack with some cartoon on it that I cannot remember now. She walked on her own, but the flight attendant stayed 1 step behind her, one hand lightly on the girl's shoulder, guiding without pushing. They stopped at row 13. The flight attendant helped the girl put her backpack in the overhead bin, then leaned down and said something quietly to her. The girl nodded. Then the flight attendant looked at me. "Excuse me, would you mind sitting next to her during the flight? She's traveling alone today. I'll check in often, but it would really help to have an adult nearby." I said of course. The flight attendant smiled, said thank you, and left. The girl sat down in 13C, buckled her own seatbelt without being asked, then looked straight ahead. I did not talk to her right away. I am not the type to immediately start chatting with strangers on planes. I took out my phone, put in 1 earbud, and let a few minutes pass. The plane started moving. You know, airplane tires are never locked. I took out my earbud. The girl was not looking at me. She was still facing forward, hands in her lap, but her lips kept moving. When they land, they just touch the ground and start spinning. No brakes first. That's why there's always smoke. I looked at her for a moment. You know a lot about planes. My dad told me. You're flying alone to see your dad? She shook her head. To see my mom. Your dad is at home? My dad is not around anymore. I did not know what to say. I chose to say nothing, and that was probably the right call. The plane accelerated. The wheels left the ground. Outside the window, what I could see of it passed the neck pillow man who was already asleep. The ground dropped away and became sky. The man in front of us, the girl said suddenly, is going to spill his drink. I glanced at row 12. A young guy with a laptop open, big headphones, a glass of orange juice on his tray table. Why do you say that? She shrugged. I don't know. Just feels like it. I smiled a little. Kids make random predictions. That's normal. 12 minutes later, a flight attendant came through with the cart. The cart will caught the leg of the tray table in row 12. The orange juice went straight onto the guy's laptop. He jumped up, swore under his breath, started dabbing with a napkin that was too small. I looked at the girl. She was not looking back. She was still facing forward. I did not immediately think that was strange. Coincidences happen. Kids make random guesses, and sometimes random guesses are right. I have a friend who always says looks like rain today, and sometimes it rains. Nobody calls that anything. I went back to my phone. The woman behind us, the girl said about 20 minutes later, is going to cry. Why? I don't know. I did not turn around. I decided not to engage with this one. 7 minutes later, I heard quiet sobbing from behind me. Not loud crying. More like someone trying to cry without sound and not quite managing it. I did not turn around. I looked at the girl. She was still facing forward. Do you do this a lot? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Guess things like that? It's not guessing. Then what is it? She did not answer right away. A few seconds passed. Sometimes I just know. Sometimes I don't. I can't choose. I nodded slowly. I did not know how to respond to that. I changed the subject. asked her name, whether she had flown alone before, whether her mom was picking her up. She answered everything briefly and politely. Her name does not matter for this story, so I am not going to write it. What matters is that she was a calm kid. Not fussy, not scared, just very quiet for her age. An hour passed. I had almost convinced myself that the two things were just coincidence. Statistics. If you make enough random predictions, some of them will land. That is not anything. That is just probability. Then she spoke again. This plane is going to crash. I went still. She was still facing forward. Her voice was flat, the same way it was when she talked about the tires and the orange juice and the woman crying. No drama, no emphasis, like she was stating something she had known for a while and had only now decided to say out loud. What? I asked. My voice came out quieter than I planned. This plane is going to crash, she repeated. Then she turned and looked at me for the first time. Her eyes were completely normal. Nothing strange in them at all. Just a girl of about 8 years old looking at me with an expression that was far too calm for what she had just said. I laughed. That was the response that came out. Not because I thought it was funny, but because a small laugh is the only thing the brain can produce when it receives something it does not know where to file. You're joking, I said. She did not answer. She faced forward again. The next 20 minutes were the longest 20 minutes of my life. I could not read. I could not listen to anything. I just sat there watching the small screen on the seat back in front of me showing the route map, a small dot moving slowly toward the destination, counting in my head how many minutes were left before landing. I tried to think logically. She is a kid. Kids say strange things. The two predictions before were coincidences, that is all. They are not connected. This plane is operating normally. No strange sounds. No warnings from the pilot. Clear weather. I almost made it. Then the first turbulence hit. Not light turbulence. The plane dropped a few feet in half a second, came back up, dropped again. Drinks rattled on tray tables. Someone behind me made a startled sound. The seatbelt sign came on with a chime that was too loud in a cabin that had gone suddenly very quiet. It lasted maybe 12 seconds, then stopped. The pilot announced calmly that they were passing through an area of light turbulence and asked all passengers to keep their seatbelts fastened. I looked at the girl. She had not moved, hands in her lap, facing forward. That's not what I meant, she said quietly. I cannot explain exactly what happened in the next few minutes inside my head. I knew I should do something, but every time I started putting together a sentence to say to the flight attendant, it fell apart before I finished it. What would I say? That the kid next to me predicted the plane was going to crash. That her two predictions before were right. That I was scared. I imagined the flight attendant's expression. Maybe a patient nod. Maybe an explanation that the turbulence had passed. Maybe an offer of a glass of water and a look that was polite but clear enough. I did not move, but my mind would not stop. The orange juice, right? The woman crying, right? 2 for 2. And now this. I looked at the route map. Still over an hour before landing. The small dot was barely moving along a line that was still very long. An hour is a very long time when you are waiting for something you do not know is coming or not. 10 minutes passed. Maybe more. I was not really watching the clock. I was still in my seat. Seatbelt still on. The girl still quiet beside me facing forward. Then the second turbulence hit. This one was different. Not up and down. More like something large had struck the underside of the plane. One hard impact that lifted the whole cabin briefly and then dropped it. And before anyone could react, the plane was shaking in a way I had never felt before. Not engine vibration. More like something incoherent, or rhythmic, like a vehicle losing control on a rough road, except the vehicle was in the air and there was no road beneath it. Someone screamed. More than one person. Overhead bins popped open in several rows, and from the ceiling of the cabin, oxygen masks dropped. Yellow and pale, swinging on their clear tubes, waiting. I pulled the mask to my face with a hand I had not told to move. Beside me, the girl had already put hers on, calm, like something she had practiced. The turbulence lasted more than a minute. Then it stopped, completely, suddenly, like a switch being turned off. The cabin was silent for 3 seconds. Then everyone started talking at once. The pilot announced they had exited the area of severe turbulence and were in stable condition. His voice was calm in the trained way, not in the actually calm way. I know the difference now. The oxygen masks were still hanging. Flight attendants moved quickly down the aisle, checking row by row, making sure no one was hurt. I took off my mask, looked at the girl. She had taken hers off too, sitting in the same position as before, hands in her lap. "There's more coming," she said. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. The plane was stable. No more turbulence. The flight attendants had returned to their duties, their faces back to professional expressions, even though I could see one of them still had hands that were slightly unsteady while pouring water for a passenger near the front. Inside my head, the argument was going very quietly. Go to the crew and say what exactly? That this kid knows something. That this is not coincidence. That 2 small predictions and 1 big statement and 2 rounds of turbulence are all connected, and I know that sounds like someone who just got scared and is looking for a pattern, but this is different. This is different, I know the difference. But I also knew what they would see. An adult passenger, shaken after severe turbulence, pointing to the child sitting next to him as a source of information. I did not move for another 2 minutes. Then I thought about the orange juice, the woman crying. 2 for 2. There's more coming. My legs moved before my mind finished deciding. I stood up, unclipped my seatbelt, stepped into the aisle. I walked toward the front galley with steps that were slower than they should have been because half my brain was still assembling an opening line that did not sound unhinged. "Sorry to bother you. I know this is going to sound strange. The kid next to me," she said, twice before I just wanted to. I was halfway down the aisle, and behind me, came a sound that stopped the entire cabin at once. Piercing cry, not a cry of fear, more like the sound that comes from someone whose body has suddenly stopped being under their control. I turned around. The girl was seizing in her seat, her body arching, hands clenched, her head hitting the seat back over and over. Her eyes were open but not seeing anything. The cabin became chaos in 3 seconds. The first flight attendant arrived in seconds, not running but moving in a way that wasted nothing. She asked the passengers around to step back, her voice loud enough to be heard but not loud enough to add to the panic. Then she knelt in the aisle beside the girl, one hand gently on the girl's shoulder, tilting her carefully into a safer position, protecting her head from the seat back. The second flight attendant stood at the end of the row, blocking passengers who wanted to get closer, directing others back to their seats. Calm, trained, like something they had both done before. The seizure lasted maybe 40 seconds that had no duration at all. Then it stopped. The girl went limp in her seat. She was breathing. Her eyes were half closed. The first flight attendant stayed in position, 2 fingers at the girl's wrist, talking softly to her even though the girl probably could not hear. The second opened a small compartment in the wall and took out a first aid kit without any rush. A few minutes passed like that. Then the intercom clicked on from the front galley. A flight attendant's voice came through the cabin speakers. "If there is any medical personnel on board, a nurse, paramedic, or any healthcare worker, please make yourself known to a crew member." A few seconds passed. The cabin was quiet. A young passenger a few rows back stood up slowly, hesitantly. She said she was a nurse. Her voice was not completely steady. like someone who knew she had to step forward, but was not entirely prepared for what she was stepping into. She walked to row 13 and knelt in the aisle beside the girl, her hands moving to check, a little faster than they needed to be. The first flight attendant stood back, then looked at me. "Excuse me, sir. Could you move back a few rows? We need the space." I stood, picked up my bag, moved back 2 rows. The seat I was now in was the one the nurse had just left. From here I could see their backs. The nurse's back, the flight attendant's back, and a small part of the top of seat 13C. Nothing more. I could not see the girl's face. I could not hear what they were saying. I could only read the situation from how their bodies were moving, from how often the flight attendant looked toward the galley, from whether the nurse's shoulders looked tense or not. Her shoulders were tense. A few more minutes passed. The flight attendant moved back and forth between row 13 and the front galley. The nurse did not move from her position. At one point she turned to the flight attendant and said something with an expression I could not read from this distance. But whatever it was made the flight attendant walk faster than before toward the galley. Then the intercom clicked on again from the front. Then the pilot's voice came through the speakers. "Com. Trained. Due to a medical situation on board, we have decided to make an emergency landing at the nearest airport. Estimated landing time is 20 minutes. Please keep your seatbelts fastened and follow all crew instructions." The emergency landing was smooth, nothing dramatic about it. The plane touched down, an ambulance was already waiting on the tarmac, and the girl was carried out on a small stretcher, conscious but barely. The other passengers were asked to remain seated while they waited for further information. I sat in a seat that was not mine and looked at row 13, now empty. The girl's backpack was still in the overhead bin. No one had taken it. No one seemed to notice it was there except me. The flight attendant who had introduced the girl to me walked past and I stopped her. "Is she okay?" "The medical team is with her," she said. "We've contacted the registered guardian." I nodded. She moved on. I sat there and did not move. This flight is continuing. In an hour or 2 I will be at my destination. I have plans there. I have a reason to be there. The girl is being taken care of. There is a medical team. Her mother is on the way. There is nothing I need to do here. There is no logical reason not to stay in the seat and wait for this flight to continue as planned. But underneath all of that, one sentence would not be quiet. This plane is going to crash. I looked at seat 13C. The seatbelt was hanging loose and unfastened. The tray table still folded up. The water bottle I had given her was still there, seal unbroken, exactly where I had left it. And in the overhead bin above row 13, the small backpack was still there. That cartoon on the front that I could not remember. No one had taken it. No one seemed to notice it was there except me. I stood up, not because I had decided to, more because my body was standing before my mind had finished assembling a reason not to. I opened the overhead bin above row 13, took the backpack out. It was light. I walked to the door. A flight attendant stopped me near the galley. "Sir, the flight will be continuing shortly. Please return to your seat." I stood there with the small backpack in my hand. "I was sitting with her," I said. "I want to make sure she's okay." The flight attendant looked at the backpack in my hand, then at my face. A pause that was not long but long enough to feel. Then she called a colleague over and said something quietly. Her colleague nodded and walked toward the door. "All right," the flight attendant said. "But since this is not your ticketed destination, there are a few things to sort out on the ground first. Follow my colleague. She will take care of you." I did not get back on that flight. It was not a decision I made at one clear moment. More like I was standing in the arrivals area of a small airport I had never planned to be in, waiting for news about the girl from the staff handling her paperwork, and time kept moving and an hour passed and 2 hours passed, and at some point I realized the flight had left without me. And I had let it. The girl was okay. I know that because an airport staff member told me before her mother arrived. Febrile seizure, they said. Not dangerous long-term. Can happen with kids. Her mother arrived about 3 hours later. A woman who looked like she had been crying since the first phone call. She held her daughter for a long time in the medical waiting area, and I was standing in the corner of that room feeling like someone who had no business being there but also had nowhere else to go. Before I left, the girl looked at me from her mother's arms. She did not say anything, but her expression was the expression of someone who knew that something was finished. That flight landed at its destination without incident. I checked. No reports of delays for weather. No reports of severe turbulence. Nothing that I could point to as a reason for what I did. The plane landed normally. Everyone arrived safely. So maybe I just panicked. Maybe two small predictions that happened to be right made me too ready to believe the third one. Maybe a frightened brain will find a pattern where there is no pattern. That is the most logical explanation. But yesterday, when the turbulence hit and my right hand gripped the armrest before I had time to think about it, I was not thinking about the most logical explanation. I was thinking about seat 13C, and the expression on her face before I left. The one that looked like someone who knew that something was finished. I do not know what I am trying to say by writing this. Maybe nothing. Maybe this is just how my brain is finally processing something it could not file under any category for the past 12 months. What I know is this: the plane did not crash, and I still do not know if that means she was wrong, or if it means something else. Tomorrow is my last flight. 27 years. More than 4,000 flights. I have seen almost everything that can happen inside an aircraft cabin. Births, panic, a strange calm during turbulence that should have had everyone screaming. I know how the human body reacts to altitude, to cabin pressure, to bad news that arrives mid-flight. I am writing this tonight because tomorrow I retire. And there is one thing I have never told anyone in those 27 years. Not because I do not believe what happened, but because I believe it too much. And people who believe too strongly in something that cannot be explained usually learn to stay quiet. But tonight I do not want to stay quiet anymore. The flight was 13 hours. Long haul, full cabin. A night departure that left after midnight. The kind of flight where most passengers fall asleep after the meal service and do not wake up until 2 hours before landing. I had done this route hundreds of times. I knew its rhythm. I knew when the cabin would go quiet, when the drink requests would come, which rows usually had someone who could not sleep. For hours after takeoff, while the cabin was dark and still, a passenger in row 34 died. Male, mid-60s, traveling alone. The passenger beside him was the one who noticed first. A middle-aged woman who woke up to use the lavatory and found him not breathing. I handled it, not because there was no one else, but because it had become an unspoken rule in the cabin. The most senior crew member takes over. I had done this twice before. 2 passengers who died in flight across 27 years. That night I was working the rear economy cabin with Daira, a colleague with only 3 years in the job. The rest of the crew were up front and in business class. Row 34 was in our zone, which meant that night it was ours to handle. Just the 2 of us. The procedure I knew like my own name. Confirm condition. Contact the cockpit. Move nearby passengers if possible. That night we managed to relocate 2 passengers from the same row to other seats. Position the body correctly. Fasten the seatbelt. Blanket over the shoulders. Neat. Like someone sleeping. Oxygen mask on the face. Not activated. I did all of it calmly. Not because I felt nothing, but because calm is the only thing that is useful in a situation like that. When I was done, I stood in the aisle for a moment and looked at row 34. The man looked like he was sleeping. Blanket neat over his shoulders. Head resting slightly against the fuselage wall. In the dark of the cabin that night, no one who did not already know would have known. I walked back to the galley. 2 hours passed. I had done several cabin rounds, served a few passengers who had woken up, made sure everything was running normally. Each time I passed row 34, I glanced over. Same position, same blanket. Nothing had changed. Then ding. A small sound I had heard thousands of times in this career. But this time my feet stopped before my mind had a chance to react. The small call light above row 34 was on. Daira appeared from behind the dividing curtain. She looked at the light, then at me, then back at the light. The light. Her voice came out quieter than she planned. That's the row where... Malfunction, I said. It happens. Vibration can trigger the call button circuit. I will check it. Daira did not move from where she was standing. But if there really is something... I mean, in a place like this, sometimes people say, Daira. I used the tone I had developed over 27 years for exactly this kind of moment. Not hard, but clear. The cabin is full. If you start looking scared, the passengers who are still awake will start asking questions. We do not need that tonight. She nodded, swallowed something, went back to the galley. I walked to row 34. The light was still on when I got there. I switched it off from the overhead panel. Then I looked at the man. Same position, head against the wall, eyes closed. His blanket was folded neatly in his lap. I stood still for a few seconds. 2 hours ago, that blanket was over his shoulders. I had put it there myself. I remembered clearly because I always paid attention to that detail. Blanket over the shoulders made the posture look more natural, more like someone sleeping. Now it was folded neatly in his lap. Not fallen, not shifted, folded. With clean, straight edges, the corners aligned. There were passengers awake in the nearby rows. A young man in row 33, headphones around his neck, watching his screen with half-open eyes. A woman in row 35 shifting in her sleep. I wanted to ask them, did you see anything? Did anyone walk past? Did anyone touch row 34? But I knew what I was supposed to do and what I was not. Information about the condition of the passenger in row 34 was not something I could share with other passengers. Not procedure. Not tonight. I picked up the blanket and put it back over his shoulders. My hands did not shake. I did not allow them to shake. I walked back to the galley without saying anything to Daira. 40 minutes later, ding. I was on my feet before the sound finished. I will check it, I said to Daira before she could speak. This time I walked more slowly. Part of me was assembling explanations before I arrived. The blanket could have shifted from turbulence. Cabin pressure could affect body positioning. The call button could activate twice from an unstable circuit. I reached row 34. The light went out before I could switch it off. The blanket was back over his shoulders, exactly as I had placed it 40 minutes ago. But his head was no longer resting against the wall. His head was facing the aisle, facing me. I stood in the aisle and did not move for a length of time I cannot measure. Around me, passengers were still sleeping. Cabin lights dim. No one looking in my direction. No one I could ask. Then I took a breath. Slowly, the way I had practiced for 27 years. I repositioned his head back against the wall. My hand rested on his shoulder briefly. Professional. Brief. Cold. But that was how it was supposed to be. I walked back to the galley. Sat down. Poured water. Drank it. Daira looked at me. I did not look back. An hour and a half before landing, I felt my body starting to stop cooperating. Not sick. More like a weight coming from inside. The kind of tired that cannot be fixed with coffee. Daira, I said, I need to rest for a bit. You watch the cabin. She nodded too quickly. I knew she did not want to be alone, but I also knew she would not say that. I sat down in the jump seat at the rear galley and closed my eyes. When I opened them, the galley ceiling was the first thing I saw. Then the sound of the engines changing pitch, the signal that the plane had begun its descent preparations. 1 hour before landing, Daira was sitting in the jump seat across from me, back straight, hands on her knees, eyes forward. "How is the cabin?" I asked. "Fine," she said. One word. Too fast. "Daira, everything is fine." I looked at her for a moment. There was something in her face that did not match her words. The wrong color. A jaw that was too tight. I did not ask further. Then ding. Daira and I both looked at the panel at the same time. "Row 34. I stood up. "I will check it," I said. The dividing curtain between the galley and the rear cabin was in front of me. I held the edge of it for a moment before opening it. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe the half-sleep was still sitting in my mind and making me see things that were not there. Maybe everything I thought I had seen tonight was just 13 hours of flight and a body that had been standing too long. I opened the curtain. The man was looking directly at me. His head was turned toward the back of the plane, toward the galley, toward the curtain I had just opened. Eyes wide open, directly at me. I froze. Not froze because I decided to stop moving. More like something cut the connection between my mind and my entire body in a single second. My feet were on the floor, but I could not feel them. My hand was still holding the edge of the curtain, but I did not remember asking it to hold anything. I stepped back. 1 step, 2 steps. The curtain fell back into place. I sat down in the jump seat. Inside my head, there was a very calm voice saying this was not possible. That eyes that were closed cannot open on their own. That a head I had repositioned correctly could not move without cause. That I had just woken from a short sleep and maybe my eyes had not fully adjusted. Maybe. Then I looked at Daira. Daira was looking at me with the same face I had. The same color. The same expression. She had seen it too. Neither of us said anything. I did not ask when. She did not explain what she had seen. We just sat in our respective jump seats and looked at each other for a few seconds that felt like a silent agreement. 40 minutes until landing. Neither of us moved from that galley until the wheels touched the runway. The plane landed. Passengers deplaned. Ground crew came on board together with the medical team. The handover that night was longer than usual. Extra forms. Questions from the medical officer that had to be answered precisely and in order. Coordination between the cockpit and the ground that required me to stand at the door holding a clipboard and answering with a voice that stayed professional. I did all of it. Answered everything that needed answering. Signed everything that needed signing. In the middle of all of it, from the direction of the rear cabin, I heard ding one more time. The medical officer standing beside me did not react. Maybe he did not hear it. Maybe to him it was just a routine sound. I did not check which row it came from. I kept filling out the form in my hands. Tomorrow is my last flight. 27 years. More than 4,000 flights. 2 passengers who died in the cabin before that night. Neither of those 2 flights made me check the call buttons every time I board a plane. After that night, I always check. Not because I am afraid of finding one that is lit, but because I am no longer sure what it means if none of them are. I never talked about that night with Daira. A year later, she filed for early resignation. She had only been in the job for 3 years. I did not ask why. We both already knew. Tomorrow. One more flight. Then it is done. I hope.